What do you think is the main issue with client-side rendering? There seems to be enough information out there, but it seems people still making the same mistakes over and over again.
Yeah, so I think there's a few different issues at play here, really. One definitely is that the DOM surface is just very large. It's a gigantic API, and I keep discovering these new things that I've never heard of, that are sometimes even a little obscure. Like you can do some range things and then create HTML for that. That's one thing. The other thing is that we still tend to work on very high-end devices and fast internet connections. So most of the times, until we commit some real atrocities, our stuff is still fast for us developers. But then obviously shipping to real users turns out to be a surprise, because normally that isn't the same specs, or it doesn't. The hardware at customers' ends do not have the same specs as we developers used to. And then a lot of the information is condensed in one place, and then it looks like a gigantic wall of text with a gigantic amount of images and even video. And I think if you really have to deliver something on time quickly, it might appear to be something that you can basically just slap on at the very end of developing, which never happens ever in any project that I've been to, and I'm doing this for over 10 years now. So I think this is like a mix of all these things, and also it's not very intuitive to find out what is fast and what isn't fast when you kind of develop alone.
Do you think there is a problem that we discard things too quickly? That there is there's always this one article that says this is the Antichrist, don't use this kind of functionality. And then everybody keeps repeating that. And in between, it might be that the technology advanced and the browsers advanced and environments advanced. It's not much of an issue anymore.
Certainly.
I mean, one big example was Transform 0 on elements to make them faster in iOS.
Yeah. Funnily enough, that still does happen every now and then. So it's a lot of cargo culting, and that comes back into what I said earlier, where I said we don't read these articles, and then we might be inclined to just skim through them really quickly and just draw the bits and pieces that are in red, and it's use this translate Z0 hack to make things faster, and then we slap that onto everything, and everything gets slower. And we're this article lied to me, and the platform changes, and we do not revisit these things because we have not really visited them in the first place. We have just grasped some intelligence without really understanding what the reasoning behind is. So I believe that we should more often step back, measure things, and then respond to that. So rather than chasing the latest and greatest in performance, virtual DOM, React, whatever, instead of just chasing these trends, we should step back and go, so if I create an element like this, and do this 10 times over, is that fast or is that slow? Or if I animate this width property of this element, is that fast or is that slow? Oh, it's slow. Why is it slow? Do I have tools to find out? Yes, we have. We have the timeline that is great and has shipped into all browsers as far as I'm aware. So I think we should, rather than trying to cargo cult things over, sit back, observe and measure. And I think that's the most important lesson in performance, really.
Do you think there is there are a few services that web page test and these kind of things that test the loading and also give you even insight into the CPU and the GPU usage of the website. But do you think these tools can be a bit daunting and too overwhelming? I mean, when I open Chrome Developer Tools, there's so many features in there. I think it feels like using an IDE by now. Yeah. Do you think there is a way that we could have presets in developer tools saying okay, here's a task-driven developer tool rather than here's the kitchen sink and I hope you find what you need?
Yeah, certainly that is a problem. Even I still discover things. So for instance, if you use workers that do some computations in the background, which is great for performance if you have to do long-running calculations in the background, you get these striped graphs in the timeline, and I'm what the hell is this striped graph? What does it mean? And there's literally no explanation for that. There is tooling that tries to be simpler than that. I hear that Calibra app is pretty good, but that's OS X only. Chrome has the Lighthouse, I think, which is a bookmarklet extension. It's not a bookmarklet, it's an extension that gives you a breakdown of it. I think PageSpeed Insights tried that. I don't like that too much because it gives you a score, and you might end up chasing the score rather than thinking of user needs and user perceived performance. So I think that we have to find a balance still. I don't think we have found a balance for tooling yet.
Is there a massive difference between the score and what really is necessary for the user? Are these false positives?
So for instance, Lighthouse really is primarily aimed at progressive web apps. So it's going to deduct points when, for instance, you are not having SSL on the page, which is something that I believe we should have for different reasons, but it's not really a performance consideration. HTTP2, which needs SSL, sure is, but even if you just stick with HTTP1 but get SSL, it gives you more points. So instead of saying, hey, this is great, but you should actually also switch over to HTTP2, which makes it faster. If you're already on SSL, you have one less obstacle for that journey. But it doesn't. So you go, hey, I have 100 points, so I'm good. And that might or might not be true. It's relatively accurate, it's relatively good, but it does give you maybe a false sense of priority as well, because for instance certain security headers are not part of that, but you get 100 of 100 and you're like, my app is performant and great.
And it also gives you something to show to your boss who doesn't want to understand any of that anyways.
Yeah.
It's a bit like having unit tests that are too simple, that like, oh look, my app doesn't fail, but it also is unusable.
Yeah, it's true.
I think it's a bit unfair to hammer on Lighthouse, because Lighthouse is there for PWA linting, really, like for telling people. So
but I see it being used differently.
Yeah, the performance is a bit of it, so people use the wrong tool for the wrong job, I guess, in this case. But it is a cool tool, so it's basically. I guess it's tempting to use it for everything. How far do you think does simulation go? I mean, most developer tools now allow you to simulate mobile devices and also simulate slower connectivity and even like GPU throttling. Is this something that is useful for a first check, or is the best way still to have access to a device lab or have lots of devices yourself?
One last sentence to Lighthouse. Sure, I'm not trying to hammer on it. I'm just saying use the right tools for the right thing that you're trying to figure out. Lighthouse is great, and it's actually, I think it's coming to Chrome without having to install an extension, which is even better because that's less extension.
I guess Google I/O will have a lot of talks
Probably.
about that. Yeah.
Regarding the throttling, that is a great estimation. It's not perfect because different devices still behave differently, but I do believe that it does help a lot to throttle your connection, to throttle your CPU as well, and then measure things there. It is an approximation that helps you getting a better feeling for things. Also, it is quicker to iterate. I do still test on devices, and I still think it's the best recommendation for everyone to have an old Android device and an old iOS device lying around. You don't have to have a full-blown device lab, I would say. Maybe even have an old Windows mobile phone just for shits and giggles. And then just see how it behaves on these devices. Also, so the speed throttling is great, but what it doesn't cover is if you're running out of memory, for instance. It also doesn't cover if your device is just genuinely slow in transmitting the events to the system, not because of CPU, but because of driver issues or something like that. That's particularly on certain Chinese Android phones. And I think it's also just like the haptics of, oh, this is too small to tap it. PageSpeed Insights finds these or tries to find these things where touch targets are too small, but I think still testing on a real device, like literally putting your hands on the button, is the best way to actually feel the problems of the user. That said, use 3G. Like, do not enable wireless LAN on your phone when you test, because that's kind of pointless again. But yeah, the throttling helps to get a first approximation, but I still think it can't replace the actual device testing.
Talking back to client performance, do you think there is an issue that a lot of people that there is a massive disconnect between what we do on desktop and what we do on mobile? Whereas and there is there's a tendency that people just shout at each other, saying like, well, all my users are mobile. You should only think about mobile users. And other people are saying like, I'm trying to bring gaming into the browser, so we need the performance. And if I use WebGL for everything, I have the performance. So. It seems to me that being a web developer nowadays gets more and more into being able to understand how the browser themselves work and how also graphics rendering works. Do you think there's a danger that we overcomplicate things and we we basically block out people that might be interested by telling them upfront, here's all the things you need to know?
That's a general problem in the web right now, because when I started, I had a notepad and I had Internet Explorer, and that was it. And syntax highlighting was something to wish for, really. Now we tell them, oh, you want to start a website, so install npm. Oh, for that you need to install Homebrew. So install Homebrew, then Node, then npm, then Bower, then install Angular 4, and then install all these 25 other plugins that you need to make something that is useful. I disagree. I mean, all these toolings solve problems that you have when you professionally develop websites or web apps. But I think unless you understand the problem, you should not just slap something on without understanding what you are doing. And there's also a problem with boilerplates. And I hear more and more people go like, I skip this boilerplate because it does all these things that I don't know what exactly they're doing. We should not do this. We should literally start from the beginning and go and then basically fix problems as they come along and document our solutions so that other people can piggyback on that if they hit the same problem. So what I try to do whenever I find a solution to a problem that I'm encountering, I'm writing about the problem first and then say I hit this bottleneck, I hit this problem that our WebGL application was slow, and then I did these 5 steps and found out it's slow because of X, and then I found out X can be solved by Z. And then I solve Z with this particular thing, and then everything is great. Your mileage might vary. That's an important sentence. If you find an article that solves a problem that does not have that sentence, that's questionable. Because nothing is just black and white, really. And that comes also back to the entire rendering question. Like, a lot of things are overcomplicated, in my opinion, and a lot of things abstract us away from the platform. The platform improves, but we don't even understand what the problem was that we solved in the first place. And if we are really unlucky, we work around something that the platform does for us for free, and then code that we write will have bugs. That's just a matter of fact. The fewer code, the lesser code you can write, the better that is. And I think we have to make sure that we are not just building things, piling things on top of each other because of cargo culting or because we had this problem 10 years ago and we don't even know if this still exists.
There is a problem that we're trying to fix, problems of a certain amount of, or a certain stage of hardware or operating systems with lots of polyfills and libraries, and we never take those away, even if the usage of those hardware pieces or these even versions of operating systems are not in use any longer. It seems there's a problem that we're trying to be too clever about fixing things before they actually get a chance to get fixed, because once the operating system or the browser fixes them, that's a much better use case than it's being on us to do that.
Absolutely.
Feels good though to do it. It feels clever doing it, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, writing a polyfill is a great feeling, and I'm really thankful for everyone who did it, but I think it's also important to feed that back to browser vendors to fix, or operating system vendors to fix. And I think we are missing this last step for reasons that I don't understand. It was in this particular room a couple of days ago during the conference here, where someone complained about the web speech API, and I said, have you filed a bug about this? And they said, no. I'm like, why not? Because I think when we hit these problems, go to the bug trackers from the browsers and tell that people that there is a problem to fix. And it gets fixed. It might take long. It might take ages, really, if we are unlucky and it's a really niche bug. But at least you raise the awareness and other people can tag on, and then browser vendors see, oh, there's 1,000 people that have commented on this bug within 24 hours, so maybe it is a problem. And I think we're missing that.
There seems to be, I mean, I was always, when I worked for Mozilla, we did all the WebGL stuff and the cool Unreal 3D demos and these kind of things, and showed like how cool a browser behaves in terms of performance and what is possible with AAA gaming in the browser, and now with Edge as well, on even on PlayStation, even on Xbox. But I always found that, like, so what? I'm not going to do this. I find this really weird. But at the same time, it seems pushing hardware in this direction and browsers in that direction had a lot of positive fallout in terms of APIs and functionality that we now have in the languages itself. Like indexed arrays came from WebGL because that's for the first time we needed them. And a lot of more things became hardware accelerated over time. Canvas became hardware accelerated. Do you think there is it should be something that new developers should be aware of, that there is more to it than just the web, and that there's do you think knowing about graphics rendering and GL and these kind of things is a necessary skill nowadays?
Necessary, I'm not sure, but you should definitely, when you hit performance problems, you should definitely not stop before you get to the pixel, because I think that's an important thing to also build up intuition. If you've ever thought about the fact that painting on the web has to be a slow process, because you have to literally fill in all the pixels. If you have a 10,000 by 10,000 or 4,000 by 4,000 pixel grid and you have to color in every pixel individually with physical pens, you will soon find out that's not a fast process. Whereas when you have like overlay, transparent kind of plastics and you color things in and then just move them around instead of having to basically just redo it from scratch, you'll figure out, hey, wait a minute, that's faster if I can just shift things around and it looks the same, but I'm faster with that. And that's what compositing is. And I think these things, you don't really have to understand what exactly happens on the GPU level for that, but I do think that you should understand the basics of what does it mean to render a pixel? What does it mean to paint? What does it mean to composite? Why can I composite some things and not other things? What is layout really? Without going into the browser details, just like on a very high level, just think through how would you implement something that takes text and draws something on screen based on the text you give it, because that's what a browser is. And I think demystifying that, because right now it has this, the browser is a C++ land of wonder and magic, and there's dragons waiting for you to be slayed, but you have to have really good equipment to do that. I think that's not a good thing, because we should more understand what it does. We should understand the complexity of what a browser does, but also understand that it's not magic. It is understandable, it is comprehensible, and it does certain steps, and the fewer things we have the browser, like we cause the browser to have to do, the better that is. And I wouldn't say it's necessary to begin, but definitely once you start getting into performance and performance problems and performance improvements and tuning, you should dive a little deeper than most of the articles that at some point cut off and say compositing is great and it's fast and it's hardware accelerated. Because what does that mean?
So there seems to be a weird problem that we have too much information and not enough people reading it. What would you say is the easiest trick for you to keep up to speed on information about this, and where do you find and how do you discard the things that are not necessary?
Right. I base it on what I do daily. Now that to me is a lot of WebGL and web components and stuff, but generally if you build something, experiment with the things that you're finding, and also like give yourself the time. I do this every morning when there's not many people in the office. I wasn't a morning person until recently, but now I'm a morning person, so I'm using this 1 hour in the morning when I'm basically alone in the office to sit there and just try random stuff out. Like a couple of weeks ago, I asked myself, is inner HTML a lot slower than creating a document fragment and then putting things in, or not? And then I experimented and I found out, oh look, it is. And then I thought about why is that? And I dug into the specs a bit, and it might not be directly applicable, but it does help you to understand what's going on under the surface. And later on, you might hit a weird edge case problem or a bug or a performance issue where you need these things. Also, if you see articles that get shared a lot on Twitter, definitely recommend having a look at that. There is the changelogs from the browsers. There's also Microsoft has this user voice thing for Edge, where people can vote on issues. I highly recommend just checking out what gets voted there. Is there something that could bite me as well? Because if it is highly voted, then there might be something interesting. And it mostly is, it's not as many bugs, it's mostly new stuff coming, like Houdini. I've never heard about that until half a year ago when I just saw it scroll by in a tweet storm, really. And I'm like, ooh, this is looking interesting. And I dug into it and I found out that it's very vague right now and very early on, or was back then. Now it's much more clear what it does and what it will bring. So I started digging into it and just do that, really.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
Welcome. Has been a pleasure.